jealousy, envy. Ugh, none of us like feeling that way. And we certainly don't treat others well when we're feeling that way. It's just this vicious cycle of broken, hurt people hurting each other. But God came to the earth and died on the cross for us to set us free, even from envy and jealousy that breaks and hurts and destroys. And that is what we're going to talk about this week. If you've ever struggled with jealousy, you're not alone. In fact, I think that's why the Bible has all these stories about people's lives so that we can go and read them and be encouraged and challenged and gain insight. And that's exactly what I want to do today, is I want to share a story with you from the Old Testament that's all about the life of Saul and how his life deteriorates into jealousy. You can read the story all on your own. You can go to 1 Samuel. I'm going to start in chapter 17 and it's going to continue on more, but there's a whole lot more details that you can read for yourself. So here's the basics. Saul was the very first king of Israel, and at first he was a great king. He even had to lead his people against a huge army called the Philistines, and no one wanted to fight them, actually including Saul. They were scary, and they had this massive guy named Goliath that was like this huge giant. Everyone was terrified of them, including Saul. But then God sent a very unlikely guy, actually a kid named David. He was just a shepherd's boy, and he went up against Goliath, even though Saul said, "You're going to die if you do this." But he trusted God, and what happens? He defeats this massive giant, defeats the army, and everyone in Israel is so thankful, and they love this guy, David, including Saul. Saul says, "You should come and be a part of my army," lets him live in the palace with him, and David begins to work his way up in the ranks of the army. This is awesome. God blesses every single position that Saul gives him. God is clearly giving him blessings. And the people take notice because David is so successful. And this is what they started to say. We read, as they dance, they sing, "Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands." Now this is where it starts to get ugly. Saul hears these words, and can you imagine? What is he going to do? Is he going to be excited and praise him? Yes, this is the guy I've chosen. I saw all these gifts and talents in him, and that's why he's a part of my army. No, he just gets jealous. And listen to what he says. Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. Oh yeah, he does. He gets extremely jealous. And we read on later, he says, when Saul saw how successful he was afraid of him. How sad. You see, Saul is the one who saw David, who saw the ways that God was blessing him. He was able to conquer this giant. Of course he should be part of his team, right? Saul was the one who saw those gifts and talents in him and had him come and be in his palace. And now he was jealous of him. He was threatened by him. And he does keep his eye on him. He ends up spending the rest of his life trying to get David out. He even tries to kill him several times. His whole life begins to deteriorate, to spiral out of control. What's sad about it is it breaks the relationship of him and David. It even breaks the relationship between him and his very own son. It literally takes over his kingdom and his kingship. He literally goes from being this awesome king to a mess. How did that even happen? Well, what's interesting is years later, another man writes this passage. And I think it's really fascinating that David ends up becoming king. And then his son is the one who writes this. And listen to what he says. He says in the book of Proverbs, "A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones." You see, the reality is that envy, jealousy, it just destroys. That's what happened. Saul allowed his envy and his jealousy to override the success and the blessings that he could have seen God bestowing on David. And instead, he allowed it to destroy his relationship with David, to destroy how he was going to respond to David. And it ultimately destroyed himself. You guys, the same thing is true for us. When we allow envy and jealousy to fill our hearts, it destroys us. It destroys how we treat other people. It can destroy our relationships. It can destroy our friends and our families. And ultimately, it destroys us. It will tear us apart. It will rot through our souls. Our worth and our value will be in question. We'll start worrying about who we are, and we will forget that we really are a child of God, created in his image, and that we have worth and we value because of what blessings he's given us. And we won't even be able to see those because we will be so blinded by jealousy. So what do? I think the reality is that we can look at what Saul didn't do. He didn't focus on the blessings that God gave David and praise him. Instead, he went to jealousy. So what can we do? We can combat our own issues of envy and jealousy by celebrating others, by celebrating the gifts that we see God giving and blessing other people. And in response, I think that'll help sort of change our own hearts and remind us to remind ourselves, like, we like ourselves. God has blessed us. God is with us. So here's a simple way of remembering it. The more I celebrate others, the more I like me. That's the bottom line. And so this week, I think, let's practice that. Let's be challenged to start praising God for the blessings that we see in ourselves. Let's start with us. Celebrate. What are the things I'm good at? Maybe you need to write those down in your journals and just remind yourself, like, these are the things God is doing in my life. These are the gifts. These are the talents. These are the blessings I have. And then practice celebrating other people. Find a way to remember and celebrate them. Can you imagine what it would look like, you guys, if we weren't so jealous and envious, and we wouldn't make fun of each other? We wouldn't tear each other down out of envy, but instead we celebrate each other. We build each other up. Can you imagine how awesome it would be to celebrate the blessings that we see God bestowing on other people? Imagine what it would look like here. So this week, I challenge you, celebrate someone this week. Remember and celebrate the ways that you see God at work in your life, okay? And this week, I invite you to come and join us for youth group on Thursday so we can discuss and talk about this more in our small groups.